have a pleasure to introduce to you the panel members that we have here today to share this discussion. Matt Powell and Chad Lancaster, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
So Matt Powell, I'm at Regions. I run financial crimes. I'm very new to Regions. I'm a lifer in the financial institution, and this has been, can't see a soul, and I'm hoping the glare's not coming off of me back to you, but it's been a little bit of a high school reunion here in the room. So
I'm Chad Lancaster. I'm with SpyCloud. SpyCloud is traditionally known in the cybersecurity space, and so we're starting to take some of those analytics and data and bring that into the fraud world. I've got, I hate to say this out loud, but 26 plus years related to fraud, so it's an interesting journey trying to find new mechanisms to apply what the bad guys are doing to help the good guys. So we'll get into a little bit of that.
Thanks, Chad. And just to tell you a little bit about what I do, I'm the Vice President of Client Experience at Prove, but I'm also a fraud and cybercrime executive advisor, often called on, and I really love this topic. So let's start off. We're going to kind of lay it out like this way. We're going to talk about the problem and the impacts, and then a little bit about solutions. And so let's start out with the problem. So PayPal announced that they removed 4.5 million fake accounts from their platform. That actually affected their stock price. LinkedIn last year announced 21 million profiles removed. In fact, I just got an invite last week from Pablo Escobar. Believe it or not. Yeah, so that's scary, huh? That's lack of identity proofing there, huh? And or maybe identity proofing happening. I don't know. But he had 0 followers. So, you know, we have. Elon Musk, you know, mentioned when he bought Twitter that bots was his first problem they talked about, first problem to conquer, and I think he's probably finding that a more challenging problem than even building self-driving cars. We actually have banks too, I won't mention any, it's confidential, that are pausing their onboarding processes due to the attack rate, and a lot of that attack rate's related to bots. And I've seen automated scripted attacks that have actually mimicked the whole account opening process, clogging the operations because of the remediation of just shutting down all those accounts. So, you know, we see when we see leaks, what I call leaks on the cybersecurity side, come through and affect fraud operations, then we can see the output of that. And as fraud professionals, we deal with that. And Matt, what are some of the issues that you've seen around the impacts of bots in your career?
Sure. So the financial aspects are sort of obvious. I think the last information that I've seen, the estimate's around $50 billion attached with bot attacks specifically. You know, and that's something that we've all been dealing with for a long time. I think the part that gets missed sometimes is the amount of operational expense that goes into it. It's fairly massive, and the other piece is reputational risk. In a lot of cases, the folks that are getting impacted are generally not the customers of the financial institution that maybe the attack is happening at. And so there's just a ton of those pieces that start to add up very quickly as you think about the lost revenue, the reputational risk, et cetera. The other piece that, you know, for FIs is that bots will identify dysfunction really quickly in an organization because in so many cases you're trying to solve things in many different places, and I know that's something that is close with you, and so really being able to understand how you're using it across otherwise it can cause institutions to really trip over themselves quite a bit.
Yeah. That's really good points, Matt. And Chad, I know that you work in the dark web, your company, and you're down there and you're actually seeing the intelligence related to the bot attacks. Can you tell us a little bit about what your company sees when it comes to these kind of attacks?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we feel, you know, for every good botnet that there's a password needed. You know, account creation is a little bit different, but there's also the aspect of the ATO and the bot attacks and the password stuffing. There's numerous ways to detect this, some of which may add some friction into good customers in that onboarding process, depending on how many deny lists you want to create based on what data points you're really looking at. But in that process, we're able to see that user information and password. We've cracked roughly 90% of all user passwords in the world into clear text. So we can connect those together to see where that information is being used and when, and how that information is traded on the dark net, and what that life cycle really looks like. So there's a lot of talk that everybody's been breached, and yes, we have. And when we start seeing transactional checking where there's no association with breach, that becomes an anomaly, because there's a very large percentage of the world that's been breached multiple times a year. So when you look for that anomaly and that behavior, the lack of anything starts to tell you a little bit of a picture.
Yeah, and Chad, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that you can see this down the dark net. So a lot of us in the fraud community probably know this, but you can go on Telegram and get these lists to activate and weaponize your bots very easily. So they're just out there, they're for sale, they're I think I was talking to someone that works with the intelligence, and they said about a year ago there was about 10,000 or so Telegram channels dedicated to fraud. Now we're hearing this upwards of 100,000 or so out there now. So the information's just out there.
The cost of entry is very low for them.
That's right.
To buy, for $300, I could start being a malware infector today.
Yeah,
and literally have a customer service line that I can call if I'm having a difficulty figuring out how to start putting this into the lives of those innocent victims out there. And so the criminal networks are talking. I think the last group that was up here speaking, talked about breaking down those walls. I think that's absolutely critical of bringing fraud and cybersecurity together in this particular instance. Because if you look at the PayPal situation, hundreds of thousands of accounts ends up having to be all caught downstream transactionally, which puts a real burden on the fraud team.
That sure does. So here comes my favorite part. The way I always graded every conference that I went to was, did I walk away with some piece of information where I could go back to my financial institution and do something to solve a problem? So now we're going to talk a little bit about, now we know bots are an issue. It's an issue for financial institutions. It's an issue for social media. It's an issue across the board for, actually lots of different experiences that are out there. But what can we do about them? I know that, we're looking at web application firewalls, and we're looking at endpoint protection, and we're looking at identity proofing like we do at Prove. We're looking at fraud anomaly detection, all of these layers. And I'll start with you, Matt, what kind of layers do you find are helpful for bot prevention and detection that you've noticed in your career?
Sure. So, I think the points that you were bringing up about just the ability for the innovation on the bad guy side is at an all-time high. I do think that the upside is that I think the good guy innovation side has improved just as much. Where I've seen us trip up for financial institutions is kind of what you just said. There's so many places to where you can put in something and you're trying to identify something. I think the important piece is to really think about the risk that you're trying to address. And so there's clearly the preventative stuff. How do we just deflect the traffic from even getting into us? I think that there's the detective stuff that we talked about, especially in the identity space, and marrying those two together. And then I think the third piece that's been really important lately is the deterrent factor. So maybe you're allowing it to come in, but you're sending it down a complete rabbit hole. You're doing something to make this bot have to process more or act harder to where they're getting to the point of, hey, this is not somewhere where I want to go, or that's not a place that I want to attack. And so I think those married together and then pulled all the way through, not just at application or not just at log login and those kind of things, you're pulling that all the way through, and that really allows you to have differentiating service on the good person side, and then really allowing you to do whatever you're wanting to do with those bots, when just preventing it in some cases isn't necessarily what you want to do.
I really like that, Matt. We should all have T-shirts that say "bot disruption," and I think that's exactly a good point. Like you said, you're not going to stop it all, but definitely disrupting it is great. And Chad?
No, I had 100% agree. And anytime you can slow them down, and you're turning off avenues for them, that as you plug some of those holes, it starts to make their cost of acquisition go up. And the whole bot theme is designed around massive scale at a cheap cost for them. And the more difficult you can make it for them, their costs start to go up. The more their costs go up, the more likely they're going to go and try something different somewhere else. And so I think that's a very good point about disruption.
So, I'm going to turn it to the audience, and I have to go like this because I can't see with the light. But just for a moment, since there's we have a great audience here, is there anyone that has any questions around bots, or any comments they want to make about bots in particular? I'm happy to take those questions or comments now. Okay, yeah, it's one in the front. Yeah.
Quick question, like how do we detect the bots? What kind of signals are used to detect whether this request coming in is from a bot?
Yep. So this is like where you get into the question of man versus machine. So there's definitely on your web application firewall, you're going to have, DDoS attacks. Your CISO or your chief security officer is going to be tweaking those web application firewalls to stop, the most egregious of bots, things coming in from nation states, things coming in to hit your firewall. Those are like the big bots. Then there's a next layer down. You need to have protection at your endpoints, where your password reset is, where your login is, where these endpoints, where your applications are coming in to your financial institution. You need to have protection there that's really looking at, automated activity. Identity proofing can help too. If you have an identity proofing, if you're looking at phone signals, if you're looking at possession of the phone or reputation or ownership of a phone, that can help with your, disrupting your bot environment. Also, I would say biometrics. Biometrics play a very important part in this piece too. So if you have biometrics that look at, that piece of the, behavior that can happen in between all of those layers. And it's not just one. I've seen, I call it WAF leaks, web application firewall leaks. A web application, I've had this debate, where when I'm talking to my CISOs and my cyber, I'm on the fraud side. I'm seeing the leaks. I'm seeing where you didn't stop that bot from Russia from hitting my application flow. So you really need to have those layers. It's your web application firewall is just not going to. They're helpful. They're critical. They're just not enough. Any other questions or comments? We got one in the back, yeah? We've got a question in the back, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
So my question to Chad and Matt is, do you see account opening bots primarily for your deposit accounts or for your card account opening as well? And then I have a comment later on.
For me, they have no affinity whatsoever. They're looking for whatever, and we technically, and I haven't been at Regions long enough to say this about them, but we saw it a whole bunch on the credit card side, specifically. And we've seen a shift into deposits, and I think for lots of reasons that I won't bother the group with. But and then even getting it even outside of just checking accounts, seeing it in savings, et cetera. And I think that they're always just trying to look for that leak in joint account applications, et cetera. So there's no place that we haven't seen it, or at least attempted, and we see the testing consistently across even the areas that may be declining.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's a revenue stream to them, and it really comes down to what's their skill set. Just like we all have, a particular focus of what our daily responsibilities are, the criminals also have skills that they're going to refine and they're going to target. So if they're better equipped at handling credit card fraud, then they're going to create those bots in order to create those credit accounts that are specific to how they want to monetize once they get those accounts. So it really, we can't think about lumping them all together. It's really understanding that different criminals have different needs and different skills that they're going to exploit you.
And I think as security and fraud professionals, I think the biggest challenge, and I really loved your question, is convincing the business that those 40,000 applications in the queue last night was not from the ad, that went out on Facebook last night. We're growing, but we're not growing that fast. That those 40,000 applications are probably 98% fraud. So that's a challenge of really getting down and getting to the data and really showing. I actually had this true life experience. I was at a financial institution over a decade ago, and we actually did have an ad that went out on major media for brand recognition. And my head of analytics came to me and said, Marianne, we're seeing a lot of activity on the origination side, but I didn't have a tool. I didn't have a fraud tool to really manage that side. So I said, why don't you go get the marketing data and pull out that marketing data? So he went over and got that marketing data. Long story short, it took us about 4 months to remediate the bot attack. It was screen scraping coming off a Yodlee, and it just automated scripted attack that just hit the front end and opened up thousands of accounts. So this is an age-old problem, but it seems to be getting more and more common, and definitely there's motivations around creating mule accounts and fake accounts, and they're definitely, the bad actors are definitely, as we all know, getting their experience from social media and other places during the pandemic and all the pandemic fraud origination. They're really, fine-tuning the way those bots work and how sophisticated that they really are.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that the scale is so high that they can identify gaps, quicker than people can close them. And so I think that's why that balanced approach that we've been talking about is important, because if you've got a gap in the process that you're like, well, we're going to fix this, you're probably too late.
Yeah.
And now my comment to you, Marianne, I really love the way you broke down the different layers of defenses that can be put up against bots, for example, Visa accounts. But at the end of the day, if I'm responsible for account opening, or let's say deposit account or card account, I would emphasize the use of behavioral biometrics to look for bot-like activity, or non-human activity for account opening, which can be really effective as defense against bots.
I agree, and I would add that as a must-have layer in your actual approach. I 100% think that's a critical layer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments? I'm sorry that we have like lights flaring right into our eyes, so I've got to have to use my hand to see everybody. But yes, oh yes.
Could you talk about, in a traditional bank or financial institution, you've got risk teams and you have security teams. They don't always talk to each other. What's the minimum viable way for these teams to be synced up?
Yeah, that's interesting. In fact, sometimes the question is you've got your security teams over here and your fraud teams over here, and how do we get these teams to talk to each other, or even have lunch together? Or not point fingers at each other. Is sometimes what I've seen, and that's a really, really important question. I'll tell you what, unfortunately, sometimes brings them together: a bot attack. And so that's a way that sometimes security and fraud converge. But I have seen some financial institutions that are taking more of a financial crime approach to their structure within their organizations that actually creates governance, routines, connection points, even going as far as like, what do we have in common around controls and doing a good job. I don't think it's there yet. But it's very important, and I see this more in the identity space, because I see CISOs that are very focused on access identity, but not consumer identity. And then when that that question gets introduced, it's more the fraud team that understands that, because they take the implications of that. But I like your question. I'd like to see more organizations. I, myself, when I'm in a leadership role at the bank, the first thing I do is go meet the head of cyber. I go over and shake their hand and say, I'm here to be a good partner for you, and then try to create those kind of structures. But it's critically important. And it's critically important when banks are turning off digital acquisition. I say it's 2023, and we're having to turn off the internet. That's pretty shocking and dramatic. That for some people can be, take their whole business case out for months until they can get, one of the critical layers that are missing in place. So that really is, why that governance structure and partnership is important. Well, I think we're almost out of time, so we can take one more question. Yes?
I'm just wondering, given the effectiveness of these bot attacks, do you have an idea of what sort of percentage of the total number of bank accounts might be delinquent, fraudulent?
That's a great question. I have an answer for that. So first, we've got the example of banks, some pausing their digital onboarding because of the fact of the fraud. There was I won't mention the name out of respect, but there was a top 10 bank that got up at a conference like this recently, where the chief risk officer said 70% of all their new accounts were fraud. So, and probably some identity theft, synthetic, probably some doing first-party fraud, but 70. And that was a huge amount. So it depends on your attack rate, depends on the product, lending products. But even today, just direct deposit accounts are extremely valuable to the bad actors. They're so involved in scams, and the scams are extremely lucrative. So we see that, on a pretty large scale, that creating, thousands and thousands and thousands of fake accounts. I call it framing fraud, because it's, the accounts under Mary Ann Miller's name, yet fraud is occurring. Here's one last anecdote I'll give you. Jimmy Kirby, who is the assistant deputy director of FinCEN, took a look at, and financial institutions have the obligations to file suspicious activity reports. And he took a look at 3 million suspicious activity reports, or SARs, and he stated that there was identity irregularities. So here's Mary Ann Miller's name on an account, money laundering or some type of fraud's occurring. My name's getting attributed in a SAR. And law enforcement's looking at it and going, well, I don't know if Mary Ann did this or not, So it's not very good intelligence for the process that's intended to bring good intelligence to law enforcement. So.
Yeah, I worked with a client.
Sorry, guys, I have to be the rude one to cut you off. We're 5 minutes past.
We're 5. Oh,
stealing
great.
time at a fraud conference.
Sorry.
No, all good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.